Good morning, learners. Welcome to the lecture series. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic in research. We are going to discuss about sampling design. Sampling is used not only in quantitative research, but it's also used in qualitative research. As we know that in statistics, sampling allows testing of hypotheses. Similarly, in qualitative research, samples are used to make inferences about the population. So now let us see various aspects of sampling design. Let us start with sampling. To understand about sampling, one should know what is a sample. So we have been using this word again and again. A sample, according to the definition here, is a smaller collection of units from a population used to determine truth about that population. That means is a small part of a whole, but it represents the whole. Let me give an example. Let me give you a very household example. Suppose you are cooking rice at home. So while you are cooking the rice, how do you know that the rice is cooked? There's a bowl of rice. How do you know that the rice is cooked? So usually what we do, we draw the sample. Sample in the sense, we pick few grains of rice from the bowl, we press it to see whether it is cooked or not. So the few grains we pick from the bowl, it represents the whole. It represents the whole. That means one realizes that the rice is cooked and is fit for eating, right? So here it means that sampling is practical, it is cost effective, convenient, and manageable. So we do have some factors which influence sampling representativeness and when might you sample the entire population. Yeah, there are some factors like sampling procedure, sampling size, participation, which affects or influence the representativeness of the sample. And when might you sample the entire population? Yes, you can sample the entire population when the population is small and you have extensive resources, and you expect a very high response from your respondents. So moving ahead, when we talk about sample, we should also know about the population. So here, what is meant by population in research? That means a sample is drawn from the population, definitely. So what population are we talking about? Are we talking about the theoretical population or are we talking about the study population? So let us see what is a theoretical population. Theoretical population is also called as target population. That means who do you want to generalize is your target population. So do you have access to each and everyone in the population? Sometimes no. So the population where you have an access to is called the study population. Okay, let me give an example. Suppose if you want to study about the students in Eswatini or America or Africa, South Africa, anywhere. So students, they come under your theoretical population. So which university you have an access to? You cannot study the whole of a country. So if you have an access to any of the universities, it may be UNISA, it may be UNISWA, it may be Oxford or Cambridge. So that makes the study population. So from where do you get the list of students? You get the list of students from the sampling frame. That is the third point here. This is the third point in the sampling breakdown. So the sampling frame, we will have a detailed discussion on that. What is the sampling frame? Then from the sampling frame, you draw the sample. So let us talk about process of sampling. So we are not going in detail as far as process of sampling is concerned. We are taking only some of the points here, and our prime focus is on methods of sampling. So as far the process is concerned, sampling process undergoes several stages like defining the population, specifying a sampling frame, then you specify a sampling method, then you determine the sample size, that means how many samples, how many people you are going to draw as a sample, then sampling plan, then you start sampling, collect the data, and review your sampling process. So this is how the sampling process undergoes. So we are taking first 3 points here. First 3 points here. We'll be making one more video for the remaining points in the process. So population or definition of population here is a population can be defined as including all people or items with the characteristics one wishes to understand. So anything, whatever you are studying, becomes the population of your study. Okay, so the definition is there. And sampling frame, as we have already discussed, sampling frame is the list from which the potential respondents are drawn. That means you are going to find a list of participants from one or other sources. For example, if you're studying about the students, if you want to get a list of students, so here the sampling frame is the registrar's office, the class roster. So these are the things which comes under sampling frame. From here you can get the list of students, and the researcher must also assess sampling frame errors. So on the basis of the sources which we get, we should be able to assess the sampling frame error. Moving ahead, let us talk about sampling methods. As far as sampling method is concerned, we have two methods of sampling. One is probability sampling method, and the second one is non-probability sampling method. So under probability sampling method, we have different types. We have simple random sampling, we have cluster sampling, systematic sampling, and stratified sampling. As far as non-probability is concerned, we have convenience sampling, judgmental or purposive sampling, snowball sampling, and quota sampling. So there can be more than these methods, but we are taking the important one. So let us start with what is meant by probability sampling and what is meant by non-probability sampling. Then we'll go for different methods or types coming under each one. So let us start with what is a probability sampling. So the name itself answers the question that probability. So here, when you're drawing the sample, as far as the population is concerned, each and every member in the population has equal and fair chance of being selected. It comes under probability sampling. For example, there are 100 members in the population and you are supposed to draw the sample. So what you do, you write down the names of all the 100 members in a chit, put it into a bowl and pick the samples from there. So when you pick the chits from the bowl, you may pick anyone from 1 to 100. So here, each and every member has fair and equal chance of being selected or chosen as a sample. This method is also called as equal probability of selection. That means each one has got equal probability of being selected. In simple terms, if I say, we can equate this technique to fish bowl method. Fish bowl method. Now coming to the non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling is a technique where a researcher selects sample based on subjective judgment rather than random selection. So here in non-probability sampling, we do not have random selection of the respondent, or there is no random selection. Here, the researcher is responsible for selecting the respondent or drawing the sample. So it is used where it is impossible to draw a random probability sample due to time or cost considerations. So sometimes the researcher has got some limitations like time limitation or cost consideration, or sometimes the technique or probability sampling technique may be difficult to manage. So here the researcher tries to go for non-probability sampling method, where there is no random sampling. Now we'll see one by one. Let us start with probability sampling. What are the types coming under probability sampling? So in probability sampling, we have simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified random sampling, cluster, and multi-stage sampling. Let us see one by one, being to the point. Okay, so I'm not going in detail, just I'm giving you the information in a nutshell. Students, they can discuss in the comment or in the chat box, okay, if they have any doubts. Okay, so let us start with simple random sampling. So as we have already discussed in the beginning of the class, like while you're cooking rice or something as such, or fish bowl technique, if you know that, it's very easy to understand what is simple random sampling. So this particular method is applicable when the population is small, homogeneous, and available. Here, each element of the frame has an equal probability of selection. We say EPS. It provides for greater number of possible samples. This is done by assigning a number to each unit in the sampling frame. So as I've already discussed that, we are going to write down the names of the members in the population in a chit. So either we can write their names or we can give them a number. We can assign them a number. Then a table of random number or lottery system. So how do you pick the chits? As if it's a lottery system. So lottery system is used to determine which units are to be selected. So without being biased, we pick our sample, right? So this particular diagram or the chart will help you to understand about simple random sampling. Let us go for systematic sampling. So before we go for systematic sampling, let us see why do we need systematic sampling where we already have simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is definitely it's going to be helpful for the researcher, right? But it has got some disadvantages also, because in this particular method, the minority subgroups of interest in the population may not be present in a sample in a sufficient number for the study. So that means if there is a minority group among the members in the population, so there isn't any like chance that they will have an equal representation. So that's why you use systematic sampling. So the name itself answers when we say systematic sampling. So if you read the presentation, you will understand that this particular method relies on arranging the target population according to some order and then selecting elements at regular interval through that order list. So what we are doing, we are trying to arrange the population in an order. So this order can be in ascending or descending order. So as you can see the picture here, so here the members in the population, they are arranged in a particular order, and how we are picking how we are picking the sample. So here in systematic sampling, it involves random start and then proceed with the selection of every kth element from then onwards. So randomly, the researcher picks one from the population and maintains a gap or skip. Here in the picture, you can see uh, the researcher has picked the third member in the population, then he or she skips two, then take the third one. So this continues as long as uh, all the members are exhausted. Okay. So suppose if you are taking 10 or taking the gap of 10, so it makes sampling with a skip of 10. Or sometime what we do, like suppose if you want to collect the respondent, you may take a telephone directory and you can select every 10th name from the telephone directory. Okay, so this is one of the way. Moving ahead, we have stratified sampling. So the name itself answers the question stratified. That means we are going to draw the stratas. We are going to draw the stratas. We are going to divide the population on the basis of some category. So let me read. Uh, it is where population embraces a number of distinct categories. The frame can be organized into separate strata. So each stratum is then sampled as an independent subpopulation of which individual element can be randomly selected. So here the picture will clarify what it means. The picture says that we have divided the population into two stratas like men and women, male and female, and from this strata we are going to pick the sample in a random fashion. So this is stratified sampling. So stratified sampling is quite an effective method of sampling. It is very advantageous, but along with there are some disadvantages also. There are some drawbacks also. Here, like sampling frame of entire population has to be prepared separately for each stratum. So here you have to prepare the sampling frame for each strata. So it is as if it's time consuming, I would say, and it requires research knowledge, or the researcher should be very skilled in that. So when examining multiple criteria, variables may be related to some or others. So though we are making status, but directly or indirectly, these status may be related to each other in one or other way, and it requires a larger sample. This method cannot be applied in small sample. You should have larger sample. Coming to the cluster sample, so cluster means group. You have to divide the population into cluster. That makes it cluster sampling. So population divided into cluster of homogeneous units, usually based on geographical continuity. So here we are going to divide the population into homogeneous unit. So if you ask me, or the best example I would say, suppose if I divide the population into rural and urban area. So one cluster of rural people, one cluster of urban people. So this is possible and this makes it easy. So here, this particular method has got two stages. In the first stage is, on the first stage, a sample of area is chosen. So as it deals with the geographical continuity. So here, first stage, your area should be chosen. Then at second stage, a sample of respondents within those area is selected. First, you have to draw the sample of the area, and from that area, you have to draw the sample of the respondent. So sampling units are grouped. So the researcher must be very clear. Here, the units are groups, not an individual. In other methods, we were picking individual as your respondent. Here also we are going to have the respondent, but we are going to sample a group itself. A sample of such clusters is then selected. All units from the selected clusters are studied. Suppose if there are four clusters like A, B, C, D, if you draw the sample where you are going to pick group B and C, then from there you're going to draw the sum. That means draw in the sense you are going to investigate or you are going to interview the group itself. So each and every member in the group will be considered for the sake of research. Moving ahead with multi-stage sampling. Multi-stage sampling, it answers itself like it's a complex form of cluster sampling, but the researcher must be very clear and should be able to differentiate between multi-stage sampling and cluster sampling. So it's as if it's a complex form of cluster sampling in which two or more levels of units are embedded in one another. So here we'll have stages. We'll have different stages. That's why we call it as a multi-stage sampling. For example, in first stage, there's a random selection of a particular region or district. Then from there will be selection of village. From there, we are going to select the houses. So units will be the houses. So all ultimate units, that is houses selected at last steps are surveyed. So we are going to survey the houses, but we will start from the stage one, that is we'll draw the sample from the administrative level, like it may be a district. From district or regional, then we'll come to the village. Then from village, we'll go for the houses, and houses are going to be studied in our research. What you call